Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
All right. Hey, Alan, how's it going? Welcome to the Ethics Experts. I cannot believe it's taken me this long to have you on the show. This is crazy.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Nick. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we were talking before our Ethics Verse episode, which we've gotten a lot of great feedback about doing a show and kind of talking about a couple of different topics. So I'd love to kind of dive in just right off the bat. You've had to name the single biggest leadership gap. Like, if you were able to name that right now, what do you think that is?
I think it's the ability to or inability to hear bad news. I think leaders sometimes react emotionally with a short-term view rather than a long-term view of what's best for the organization and making decisions in relationship to misconduct that support an ethical culture. I think
So do you
that's the
think
biggest gap.
Yeah, do you think us in compliance we're just kind of more susceptible to that kind of to falling into that gap? Do you think it's a function of, how our departments are viewed as cost centers in the organization? Like because what you said is true regardless of which department we're coming from, right? Like CFOs talking to leadership, they still are dealing with those same leaders who deal with that short-termism and deal with those, that inability to hear bad news and all those kinds of things. Why is that more sort of concentrated with us, do you think?
I don't think it is. I think it's actually concentrated in leadership because I think they are not really trained or educated to understand that part of their leadership skills and capabilities is that they have to be able to encourage people to speak up to them, to hear things that they don't want to hear, and to respond to them in ways that are beyond just perhaps their own ego or protecting their own reputation. And one of the things I think we don't realize is one of the reasons our VIPs are in the C-suite is because they've had more success than failure.
Right.
And I think we don't address this in an organizational way, and we certainly don't address it in a way where we prepare our leaders to be able to handle the crisis and the challenges that they're going to face. So I think it's not a ethics and compliance necessarily issue. I think it's a leadership issue.
Yeah, the way you put that is kind of interesting. It's almost like failure kind of is disproportionately dissonant with those VIPs, as you call them. It doesn't work. They're kind of like spoiled in some ways, like a spoiled kid who doesn't get their way because they've already had this long pattern of always getting what they want. They end up kind of throwing a fit. And then if you layer in that sort of power dynamic, that power differential, it makes it hard to do what you were talking about in our pre-show of training managers and not training leaders. I mean, is that kind of the distinction that you're drawing here?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we don't acknowledge is everyone will have failures. And what leadership requires is how do you handle it?
Right.
Right. It isn't how do you bury it? How do you diminish it? How do you ignore it? It's how do you handle it? And because we are all very goals driven, and particularly in the C-suite, we are very much focused on success and meeting goals, and have numerous A-type personalities. Right. Runs counter to, I think, their own experiences and also what they've been taught on what's success. And if we judge our leaders on, well, you can only succeed by meeting the goal and never, ever take into account how they handle crisis or failure, then it's a one-sided dynamic.
Yeah, and I think just kind of getting that in, because many times we're like the bearers of bad news, and if we can just at least internalize that this dynamic is likely kind of at play, there's probably some different things that we can do to kind of overcome it. And before we kind of get into your framework, which I absolutely love, how did you come to see this problem this way? Were there certain experiences, or was it just kind of you've just kind of been you've been around it long enough that you built that pattern recognition? How did you come to this conclusion as really a major root problem?
Well, I've experienced it on a number of different levels. But I want to pull on a thread that you brought up, the bearer of bad news. I think we have to change that construct. We are not the bearer of bad news. We are the messengers on issues and items that protect the corporation in the long term. Okay, so if I'm always being characterized as the messenger of bad news, right? I'm like Linus with my little cloud of darkness
Totally.
every time I walk into the room. That's a framing and a problem that has to be addressed even before you can suggest to leaders that they should welcome this news. Okay,
Great point.
right? And this goes to, we call people who report concerns whistleblowers. Let's stop, right? And this whole construct that whenever somebody is raising an issue, it's bad. It
Right.
isn't bad. And that those people are bad. So how did I come to kind of what I've been calling my 4Ds is, I've had to, go to chairs of the board and to executives and tell them that some of, their colleagues, their friends, people who are trusted advisors to them have been involved in behavior that is unbecoming. And I've just noticed the pattern over and over and over again. Not every leader, not every board
Sure.
member, right? But one of the other things we have to keep in mind is not every leader has had to deal with this before. We
Yeah, that's a
somehow
good point.
expect that they know how to deal with this when they maybe have never really been in charge, had to drive the next steps, been in the throes of this. So they
Right.
don't have a context. But my framework and what I've seen, and it's human nature, by the way. Okay, so we have to acknowledge that this is the way people are going to feel.
Right.
It's denial. The first thing is denial, right? You just don't want to believe it. And that's okay, by the way, because you should ask some questions, right? But when you find out that your CFO or your CEO or your human resources person is engaging in behavior that you didn't know about, is puts the company's reputation in jeopardy, puts your reputation in jeopardy.
Right.
Right. I mean, part of the denial piece is always, how does this reflect on me? I
Yeah.
hired that person. What is the board going to think of me because this person did that? Right. This guilty by association piece, which actually I haven't seen that much of. I mean, I think people understand that, particularly at higher levels, these
Yep.
individuals have made intentional choices. They
Yeah, and they've kind of seen it all, to your point. They're not
Yeah.
like, you know,
So denial is the first one, and I think one of the things that we can do is to acknowledge. Of course, this is hard news to believe. Feel free to ask me questions. Feel free to challenge. Okay,
right.
because they have to be able to accept the news. The next is the demasking. Who said it? Right? Because they want to put some context around it. And it's also following the denial frame, which is, can I find reasons to discredit? Which is number
Yeah.
3, right? And we've all heard this. The person who's come forward is a frequent flyer. They're never happy, right? They're a
Right.
constant complainer. And then, the favorite is they're a bad performer. Right. And we've all seen this dynamic where somebody who's a superstar or certainly meets expectations all of a sudden now is, needs to be put on a performance improvement plan. I'm like, it probably really isn't about their performance. It's about you don't trust them anymore.
Right.
And then the last piece is dismissal. And dismissal can go in multiple different ways. Sometimes it's of the messenger. Right?
Yeah.
And back to my, your Linus with your big cloud of dust and dirt that everybody, when you walk in the room, they go, oh no, not her again.
Right.
So you get cut off from information. You lose your seat at the table. You don't get on task force. You're not invited to the board cocktail party because nobody wants to say anything to you because you might turn it into an issue. And then, of course, there's also much more what I would call blatant retaliation of, well, I think this is the person who reported it, so, they won't be included. They won't get opportunities. Oh, and by the way, now they're a bad performer, right?
Yeah, yeah. By the way, now that I look at it, you're actually a bad performer, right?
Yeah. Or by the way, you won't get those big projects or opportunities. And so, you know what?
Right.
You're just not contributing.
Yeah,
Well,
you're not having the impact that I thought you'd have. It's like, meanwhile, you've been totally, railroaded or something.
right, right. So it's a trap. And it's also human nature to feel some resentment that you've been presented with a problem, maybe
Hmm.
somewhat of your own making, maybe not, and to want to, not have to deal with people who raise issues. And we've
Yeah,
just got to get our leaders comfortable with, hey, this is part of the job. It's part of life. And it's actually a test of your leadership skills. So it goes into kind of some of the outcomes we've seen in relatively recent cases, right? Astronomer.
yeah.
Okay. There they are on the
That
jumbotron,
classic, that classic meme, the most
right?
memeable moment of 2025. Yeah,
Right. But he gets to resign. He gets to
yeah,
resign.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, if you were a middle management and you were having an affair on the company's time and dime, do you
Right,
get to resign? You
right.
don't. You don't. Nestle's is another classic for me, because it resonates with my own experience. Well, we'll just go to the executive and tell him to cut it out. And he doesn't.
Right.
Okay, so you've had the calls to the hotline. It's pretty clear that people in the organization know what's going on. They want it to stop. Usually the number one motivator of anybody who reports anything. They want it to stop, right?
Yeah, right.
They're loyal, right? This is bad for the company. Please, let's stop this behavior.
And they know that retaliation exists, so they're like already kind of putting their neck on the line, so to speak, at least hypothetically, right? They've probably seen it at other organizations or whatever. Like to your
Yeah,
point, there's a currency being spent, there's a risk being taken when somebody even does it.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And then then he doesn't, and he gets to resign, right?
right.
But contrast this to the Coles case,
Yeah,
where we don't know who the reporter was, but they get to the board and the board investigates timely, quickly, is transparent. And for Coles, right, this is the new CEO who was a star is born. And he hires his lover as a vendor in a very favorable contract terms, and they're open about it. They claw back his bonus and they fire him in a very public way. So why
yeah,
do we have these different outcomes when the behavior is essentially the same?
yeah. And it'd be so interesting to see like a study, or I would love to talk to, the compliance officer at Kohl's, and like, okay, it's a year later, whatever, 9 months or whatever later. That has to have had such a massive positive ripple effect across the culture that like, okay, I mean, because it's almost like the default view that the person, in power gets to resign and they get to save face. Like that is maybe the cynical view that the probably average stakeholder, the average employee in any organization would expect in America today, right? Bad actors are allowed to kind of drift and, kind of skate by. What a powerful message that must have sent, kind of to your point, to the broad organization. I would love to understand and see like firsthand, like what those, or secondhand, I guess, what the implications of that very public, standing 10 toes down on their values had on the rest of the organization.
Well, we can surmise, right?
Yeah, right.
The employees go, oh, okay. It's not okay to engage in this behavior no matter who you are. That's
Yeah, and also
incorrect.
it's okay to love my organization. It's okay to be loyal to this organization that is actually living out the values that it claims to care about. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, we have, I think, a polarity between short-termism and long-termism in
Totally.
these three cases, right? When you kind of lump Nestle's and Astronomer together, it's, oh, well, let's make sure he doesn't sue us.
I mean, come on.
Let's,
Right.
bury it, make it go away. Let's get out of the news cycle as fast as possible. Right. But the long term ism on this is you've told employees there's a double standard.
Right.
You told them that you're going to tolerate, if not normalize, this kind of behavior. Right. So cheating on your expense report is okay. Right.
Right.
And you've said that basically, yeah, those values, kinda,
Yeah.
sometimes.
I mean, integrity matters, but what are we going to do here? He
Well,
might sue us.
for the rank and file. Matters for
Yeah.
the rank and file. And I just, the other thing that I think, and I've had these conversations, and I'm sure that folks in your audience have, is well, they might sue us for defamation or whatever. I just have to say, in my career, which has expanded a couple of decades now, they've never sued. They've threatened to sue, but they've never sued because you know what? Truth is an absolute defense.
Well, yeah. Like how could it be defamation if it's true?
Well, and really, you want it to be
Yeah.
out there in the public.
You
How
want to
many
double down
times
on
you
it? I
took
mean, give
your
me a break.
mistress to?
Totally.
Come on! But
Totally.
this again is short termism versus long termism, right? In that we are more worried about the lawsuit than the culture.
Well, yeah, and it's like the lawsuit is almost contained in a way. It's like, well, this is the kind of payout. This is the time suck it's going to be, and the culture is kind of this more amorphous thing. Who knows? You know what I'm saying? So like,
Yes.
it's easier, and it's almost like a lower IQ or like a more base approach to. I mean, we're talking about two different risks, right? Like, it's a more base approach to risk management to just have a bias towards solving the thing that is more tangible in the short term, as
Well, you're
opposed to being able to
burying.
at least perceive or,
Yeah,
conceive of what that longer term implication
you're
might be, even
burying
though it
it,
might be
not
difficult to
solving
quantify.
it. You're burying it, not solving it.
Great point.
That's what I would say is you're deciding to do what you think is the most expedient so that people stop talking about it instead of really saying to the organization, we don't tolerate this behavior, no matter who you are, right? Because that's the
Yeah.
other thing about that denial piece is people
Yeah.
go, oh, what if they caught me?
Yeah. Right.
I don't want the CFO to get fired. I want them to be able to resign so that if I ever have that path, that's my path too, right?
Yeah. We're all hypocrites. um,
We're human.
it almost ends up kind of turning into a defense. I mean, you kind of drew the distinction of this polarity, and we talked about polarity a lot, which I want to kind of double down on and dive deeper on. But we're talking about the polarity of short-termism versus long-termism, though the polarity between the the burying the lawsuit because that's almost more easily quantified as opposed to sort of the culture, which is more long term, which is more amorphous, harder to quantify the impact on. Um, Again, I think that this polarity discussion that we had, it's been bouncing around in my brain because I kind of see it everywhere now. But the sort of amorphous nature of culture and the difficulty of quantifying what the potential impact might be, almost kind of serves as a defense that allows people to kind of reinforce that burying of it, or creates kind of an incentive to bury it, or kind of pave over it, kind of as you're saying. It's a very interesting thing how it ends up kind of turning into like a self-fulfilling prophecy or something.
Well, and confidentiality versus transparency,
Yeah,
right?
great. Another one.
Right. Another one, right? And as we kind of, think about this, one of the things that is very much on my mind is this experiment with the federal sentencing guidelines and ethics and compliance programs is 30 plus years old. And we're still doing the same thing.
Which
We're
is
doing the
wild.
same thing. We're doing the
It's
same thing.
wild.
We
Right.
have, and that's not fair. We have made substantial improvements in the way our programs are run. Absolutely. I think that that's true. But this dynamic in
Right.
relationship to how do we handle concerns that are raised and how do we deal with retaliation seems to be maybe the hardest nut to crack on this, right? Because corporations don't want to be exposed in ways that creates legal and other risk. Understandable. But on the other hand, you have humans, so you got risk. How are you? How are you going to deal with this?
Yeah. I mean, I said sometimes we're the bearer of bad news, and you pushed back on that. And I appreciate the distinction that you made. Um, and, perhaps it's rooted in like the mindset. To your point, like the smoke detector is not nervous to start beeping if it smells fire, right? Like, or if it detects fire, you know what I'm saying? It is the job. And I wonder if, so many times we kind of create these self-fulfilling prophecies and they end up kind of being rooted in our own mindset. So if I'm going into a conversation and I'm like, this person's going to be really upset about this, I can end up kind of creating that in the way that I deliver the information and so forth, as opposed to me coming in, going to my board, for example, and telling them, hey, you put me in this role for a reason. I have a fiduciary duty and this, there's a little bit of smoke here and we need to like fix this issue. To your point, they've seen it all. Anybody who's in that leadership level has ridden a bunch of horses and been through a bunch of storms, and they know that nothing is ever perfect, right? Like they all know that the best laid plans of mice and men, all of that often goes awry, as they say. And so I wonder if us just having, as practitioners, us just having a stronger mindset in like, well, this is what I'm hired to do. And these are not, I'm not bearing bad news. I am unearthing risks. I'm meant to de-risk the organization, or I'm meant to mitigate risks in the organization. And just because a risk popped up is not an indication that like I'm not doing my job. It's actually an indication that I am doing my job. Maybe that kind of boldness and that kind of confidence can help us better train, so to speak, the leadership that we're interacting with.
Right. And another dynamic is we always want to find the bad apple.
Right.
Somehow it has to be some individual's fault rather
Yeah.
than
Good point.
when the organization and construct or content in which they work, right? It's never the culture, it's never the pressure to meet goals, it's never the leaders that take ethical shortcuts. It's the one person who, right? Because we want to narrow it, and some of that is for us conceptually, that's easier to deal with. But leaders have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
these
Right.
situations are always uncomfortable, right? I mean, who wants to be sitting across somebody to say, and you're going to be
Yeah.
fired? Nobody.
Yeah, right. I mean, who wants
Nobody.
to clean up a mess? I mean,
Right.
nobody does, but that's
Yeah.
business. That's how, to your
Right.
point, it's a bunch of human beings, so like it's going to happen.
And you can do it in a humane way, not only for the person who has to exit the organization, but everybody who's involved in it by acknowledging how they feel.
Right.
It's natural. It's human.
Yeah, it is natural. So let's kind of dive into that a little bit, because I think the more of us that can kind of absorb this kind of a mindset where we don't need to be embarrassed about raising quote unquote bad news, just the same way we want the stakeholders in our organization to speak up about things that they see. It's our duty to, add enterprise value by mitigating risk in the organization. That means that there are edges that we have to sand down, and there's things that we're going to have to address. Again, all compounded by the fact that we have imperfect human beings populating all of our organizations. Why do we end up kind of paving over what's I think perhaps the most important thing that you've maybe said this whole time, that like humanizing this can really lead to a lot better outcomes, like a lot more effectiveness. Why do we pave over that? Is it just the natural kind of dehumanization that happens when we step into the four walls of an organization? Is it our own sort of anxiety that prevents us from like engaging in the humanity that we would, to your example in our pre-show about like, hospice?
Mhm.
Like what, is it just the fear of like, well, I can't kind of say everything, or I can't say anything out of risk of like the company getting sued or whatever? That just seems like such a massive unlock to me.
Yeah.
Recognizing how people are going to feel and like addressing the elephant in the room and human to human talking about those things.
Yeah. No, I think there's a couple things. Again, I think it's a polarity within organizations. Right. I think it is we don't assert ourselves, right?
Hmm.
But we also meet resistance, right? Certainly, talking about ethics, which some people think is squishy, or a
Hmm.
matter of opinion or subjective, is uncomfortable. right? And so back to the point of we got to get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Hmm.
And we need to lead those conversations, whether they're one-on-one or whatever. I'm sure, folks like I have, hit resistance on, oh, well, we can do training, but it can only be 20 minutes. Oh, we don't have time on the E-team or the C-suite agenda for that. Oh, you don't need to train the board because they're VIPs. They're so smart. They don't need to be trained. So the first line of resistance is actually your own internal colleagues,
Hmm.
right? And so you've got to have that relationship and build with them that ultimately this is better for them. It's better that we talk about it now rather than later. It's better that we get some conversation or tabletop exercises about this. Let's talk about ways we can do this where it's effective and maybe not a one-off. Right. One of the things is we always want our stuff to be a one-off, and that's not really great for us. How many organizations do tabletops for information security and cyber attacks? Add an ethical issue in.
Yeah, right.
Add an ethical issue in. Right? Do it together. Right? We do not always have to be showing up in a silo. Silos sink you. Right?
Yeah.
How can we work together in a way where we can start talking about the things that are uncomfortable for us so they become more comfortable, right? And it's a process. It's a process. You do it one step at a time. But the first is you've got to get people comfortable with the uncomfortable, and you've got to get around the ego. We're too good for
Hmm.
training.
We don't
Eh,
need it.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, maybe one question to your corporate secretary is how many people on the board have actually dealt with a crisis?
right.
Oh, maybe not as many as you think.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
let's do some crisis management tabletops.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Like, I remember when I first came out of undergrad, I would see, these highly successful people, and I really held them at this, I thought they were like gurus on the top of the mountain. And as I've interacted with people and all that, I'm just like, everyone is just kind of the same. They just kind of maybe took a little bit of a different path up the mountain, but you know, Warren Buffett, wildly, wealthy, very smart. He's not like some Uber man. He's not like some perfect person. Like there's a bunch of stuff that he doesn't know.
Still gets his
And like
milkshake at Dairy Queen.
still, right, exactly. He's drinking 6 Cokes a day, you know what I mean? But I'm just saying we can't just assume and project onto somebody who's at a different level and assume that that to your point, have necessarily seen it all and been through these crises and so forth. And I think that leveling of the playing field should allow us to engage with people at various levels in the organization more as peers, being able to talk across the table and be more of that kind of adult to adult conversation as opposed to kind of that child to parent kind of dynamic, which then allows us to really shave off a lot of the potential impact that we are kind of meant to have in our roles.
Yeah. And some of that's our uncomfort.
Agree. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Right. We also have to
It's our own mindset.
It's our own mindset of, they're going to retaliate against me. They don't want to hear it. It will be bad news. They'll blame me, right? Because some of that
Mhm.
discredit part is, and I'm sure others have experienced this is, okay, now's 30, 40, 100 questions about how I conducted the investigation.
Yeah.
Right? Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? Okay, welcome the questions. That's fine. But believe me, I wouldn't be here telling you about this if I wasn't sure.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Just saying.
Right. But I mean, again, it takes a certain confidence to be able to make that statement that I think many times because of this kind of parent-child dynamic that we tend to, have in our minds and bring to these conversations, it's hard for us to assert ourselves into that position of like advisor, and face the headwinds that are, those 4D headwinds, let's just to kind of boil it down, that we're
Mhm.
inevitably going to come in contact with because we're talking to another human being on the other side of it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you have to anticipate the resistance and figure out
Right.
how you're going to manage it. How are you going to
Yeah, right.
manage it? Are you going to get defensive when they ask 100 questions about your investigation, or say, thank you, I appreciate that. Let me walk you through what we did. Let's walk through this report. Let's walk through the evidence. They're taking
Hmm.
a risk, right? Somebody who's high profile is going to leave the organization, right?
Right.
There's going to be news and talk about that. Help them get
Right.
comfortable with it. That's reasonable.
Yeah. It's very, I love that old book, The Games People Play. That book has this kind of dynamic of the parent-child relationship and the adult-adult kind of posture that we want to be in all of our interactions, I think in business and in personal and so forth. Not to fall into that kind of child state where we're allowing for a power, differential to end up, kind of dimming our light, for lack of a better term. And I
Yeah.
think when you're in the adult to adult state, there's not all of this noise in your mind that can allow for you to kind of fall into that, assumption of positive intent on the other side and recognize that, like, okay, well, if they're just asking these questions, this is not about me. This is about me helping them get comfortable with where we're at. And some people, they're just naturally going to ask 30 questions. But again, when you're in the child state, it's easy to kind of personalize that stuff and get more defensive and, again, make yourself the kind of center of the universe, which again, a lot of children end up doing.
Yeah. But this is your opportunity to prove how thorough and what a great job you've done, right? This is your
Exactly. Exactly.
opportunity to really show you've done this in a very thoughtful, careful, timely, effective way. And by the way, you want them to be very solid on the choice they make, right? I mean, you don't want, once a
Sure.
decision is made, indecision is a big problem. You
Hmm.
can't handle a crisis by changing your mind every 10 seconds. So sure, whatever it takes, let's go. Let's talk about it. Let's get into it. You want to know every detail? Okay.
Yeah, and also like we're not perfect, so maybe someone is going to see something and say, "Oh, you know what I'm
Sure.
saying?" Like if it's a collaboration and and if it's a team, then
Yeah.
and we're assuming positive intent, then I think those things can go a lot smoother and we can get to the right answer. It's not about me being right or you being right. It's about us collectively getting to the best answer possible for the long-term success of the organization or whatever.
And assuming positive intent is key. That's
Yeah,
absolutely a key thing in all of your interactions, right? People are just trying to do their jobs, and sometimes we take things just way too personally. It isn't
totally.
really about us. It's about how they're going to make their decisions and think about what the next steps are. So help them.
So I want to kind of circle back and double down on two things that you said. One was let's not do one-offs. Let's try to weave that in, kind of weave that into all these tabletop exercises or all these trainings throughout the organization. I think that's really smart. So I'd love to hear how you would help someone or advise someone to kind of get started on that. And then secondly, for our own tabletops in terms of like training the leader, so to speak, which I don't think, kind of to your point from before, we don't do a good enough job doing. That's not a consistent muscle that we're building. We're not sort of acting as a Sherpa, we're not acting as a Sherpa through crisis, which is what our job is, right? Like many times there's going to be a crisis that it's our job to guide them through it. We have to establish that certain kind of Sherpa dynamic with these other people that are following us up the mountain. And so I want to kind of really spend a little bit of time talking about how we can better equip those folks, whether it's board members or executives or whatever, to do some of those kind of tabletop exercises to start building some, muscle memory in preparation for something should it go wrong.
Yeah. So I think this is one of the things that you don't treat like a one-time training, right? We have a
Hmm.
tendency to say, okay, here's the code of conduct where, we've got our ethics inoculation vaccine for the year and we're good. It doesn't work
Hmm.
that way. It's a muscle memory, as you said. So I
Hmm.
think you do it by asking questions, doing surveys, doing kind of assessments, and then also going through case studies. Case studies are always, I think, the best in this because people have to get their heads around facts if they're being asked to make decisions. But can you start a discussion on have you handled a crisis before? If so, can you tell us a little bit about it? What do you think
Hmm.
went well? What went wrong?
Right.
Right? That's the other thing that holds leaders back is they might have had an experience with a crisis and it didn't go well.
Yeah,
They've been
totally.
burned, right? And
Right.
when the heat gets too close, they're like, "Ooh, I don't want to do that again. So
Right.
you might be dealing with, the past. So it could be as simple as starting out with that and gathering some data, right?
Mhm.
And you think about every time they're presented with risk assessments or key risk indicators, right? Where is ethics and compliance there? Where is the crisis
Mhm.
where a VIP is stealing, cheating, lying, right? And I think you can introduce those questions when you do your reports to the board as well,
Mhm.
right? These cases happen to be unsubstantiated, but what if they were? What would
Yeah.
we do? What would we do?
Well, yeah, you can do that in real time. Again, it doesn't have to be
Yeah,
this one-off thing.
right.
It should be peppered in constantly. We should be doing, real-time simulations constantly to make sure that people are thinking about some things that are these tail events that,
It's
happen
salience.
from time to time.
It's salience. It's continually getting in front of them so that it becomes part of the conversation on a regular
Hmm.
basis, right? And they do tabletops. Incorporate an ethical issue in there. Maybe
Right.
the CIO has given a great contract to the person who's going to handle the breach. Is that good? Is that bad? Uh-oh. Oh, now we got this on top of dealing with the breach. What do we do? What do we
Right.
do? Yeah. And having people kind of take a stake on what they think they would do before it happens becomes a very powerful driver for the action in the future, right? Because they've thought about the values first rather than the emotions first. You're
Right.
switching the decision-making framework. What's best for the organization and the culture versus what preserves my reputation and ego,
Right.
right? You're changing it.
Yeah, back to that polarity between
It's a
those two kind
polarity.
of ends of the
Yeah.
spectrum. So, I think some of us might hear about these tabletop exercises. How do I find kind of a way? I'd love to be a part of it, but I never get invited. In our pre-call, you were talking about earning the seat and not waiting for the invite. So
Right.
how do they make that seat? Like, how do is it a confidence thing? Is it a relationship thing? Is it, a kind of confluence of things? Like, how do they start to make that a reality without waiting for the invite?
Well, in every everybody operates differently, but in every organization, you should be trying to build a relationship with new people all the time, right? So if you don't know your CIO or your CISO, get to know them. They're doing mandatory training like you are in your code of conduct. That's a perfect entree.
Right.
Hi, you're doing yours, I'm doing mine. Huh. Could we coordinate? Could we work together? You're doing that phishing stuff. Could we put an ethical issue in the phishing stuff? Could we refer to the code? Could we add the ethics helpline? How could we work together so it's more effective for both of us? And that's an entree to a bigger conversation, right? Because all of these things ultimately, at least in my view, are a conflict of interest. All of them,
Oh, okay.
right? Every, every misconduct case
Yeah.
you've ever seen, has it not been some kind of conflict of interest where
Yeah, I guess
somebody's
you're right.
acting in their own personal benefit over the organization's?
It's all COI. It's all a conflict of interest. You're
It's
right.
all a
I never
conflict of
even thought
interest.
about that.
Yeah, so it's all a conflict of interest. So,
Right.
when somebody decides to click on that link because they're curious, or when somebody decides that they're going to download the corporate database onto ChatGPT to write their report because that saves them time, right?
Hmm.
All of it. So
Even bullying is.
yes.
Stealing obviously is. It's all sort of self-dealing, all these things. Yeah, everything.
So how do we really, I mean, a lot of this is how do we manage behavior by setting expectations, but also internal controls and
Uh-huh.
alert systems so we know what's going on to protect the reputation. That's everybody's goal. It
Right.
doesn't matter if you're the CFO, you're the CISO, you're the janitor sweeping the floor.
Right.
All of us. So commonalities will build trust and relationships faster than differences.
Yeah. And, most likely kind of to that point, starting with those friendlies, There's a lot of commonalities. There's a lot of wheels that they've invented that we've invented ourselves that can create a lot of harmony, and also, a lot of synergy, right? Like if we can bring in some of
Absolutely.
that, that security stuff into our training, and you can start to really kind of layer in these flavor profiles and these different dishes, you can create a lot more harmony and a lot more kind of impact that is actually, effective in terms of change of behavior and embedding in the minds of the stakeholders the things that actually matter for the organization.
Well, if you want your code of conduct and your corporate values to drive behavior, it has to touch what people do every day in their work.
Right.
It can't be esoteric. It can't be philosophy up here.
Right.
Right?
It has to be real.
It
And
has to
again,
be real.
I think that kind of comes back down, at least tangentially to these relationships that you build. For somebody who's new in a company and they're drinking from a fire hose, or somebody who's new to the industry who's just trying to kind of earn their stripes, so to speak, how would you advise them to build those relationships before they need them, so to speak?
Okay, lots of
Is it just
different
a
methods.
posture? Is it just a forward pressure, or
You know what? I'm brand new. Can I have 20 minutes every other week to pick your brain on what I should know about the organization, right? Every organization has, okay, here's all the policies and the rules and all that. And then how stuff actually gets done. Right. And you don't learn that until you've been around for a little while and you got to call this person to get that person to do the other thing that the other person needs to get done. Right. I mean, it's all through humans. Right. So, and some people won't find the time on their calendar. Okay. You put them in the potential adversary column or maybe the movable middle.
right?
Some people will make time and you'll learn things and you have good dialogue. And eventually maybe it's actually an exchange. You can give them information and they give it to you, right?
Yeah,
That is your advocate, right?
and I agree 100%, and I also think it's a lost opportunity. Or I just think if I reach out to you to connect and you don't have time, and I reach out to you again and you don't have time, that's not like a loss. Like that's in that person's mind that like, all right, well, this other person has tried to reach out to me multiple times.
Go
Like
up, go down.
in
Go up, go
itself,
down.
yeah, but I'm saying even with that individual, you know, even though we haven't become buddies and had a beer yet, those interaction points, those count for something. Those are things that have happened in the world. Like you've occupied some place in their mind, based on those efforts, even if they've been unrequited or something. You know what I mean?
Right, right. Well, and it's never too late. They may not have had the
Exactly.
time the first year you're there, but then in the hallway or in a meeting or somewhere else, they hear your name come up and they go, "Ooh, maybe that's somebody I better get to know."
I'm working on this article right now on this pratfall study. And as I was working on it and I was prepping for this conversation, I think it kind of intersects with some of the trust building stuff that you said, as we were kind of prepping for this. So, do you know about this study, this pratfall study?
I
Pretty
don't.
interesting. Okay. So I'm gonna botch this a little bit, but this they took a recording of somebody, and person one was very well put together, really smart, top performer, all those kinds of things. And then person two was, kind of stumbling over their words. Okay, so this was just audio, and then they would play this audio across, the
Hmm.
sample
Hmm.
group,
Hmm.
and then people would ultimately respond to which person they liked more. Okay,
Right.
at the end of each of the pieces of audio, kind of like, 7/8 of the way through, person A and person B spilled a bunch of coffee on themselves. Okay. And then you hear this clatter and the person spills coffee on themselves. And so they inserted that into the recordings. And the people conducting the study, they thought person A would be way more, they thought everybody would love person A. Okay. And what they found is that it was like a 5x differential. People liked person B because that person seemed so much more human,
Human.
despite the fact that this person A, well put together, top of their class, top performer, not stumbling over the words, any of those kinds of things. And so they called this thing kind of the pratfall effect. And it's interesting how the more human somebody seems, as opposed to this perfect, somebody who's super, super successful that makes no errors. The conclusion of the study was somebody who makes no errors is viewed as like an object, not a human.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So
Right.
when, so it's an interesting kind of a hack when we're talking about, leadership saying something like, this is the decision we made and why. This is what went wrong, and this is what we're going to do about it. We can lean into that sort of pratfall effect and engender a lot more trust within the people in our organization. So I kind of botched that summary. Again, the article I'm sure will look a lot better, but it's such an interesting thing how we can humanize by leaning into errors and being transparent about those errors and not being viewed as this sort of corporate monolith, this object, so to speak, and rather be viewed, whether it's a program or an organization, as the human beings that we are,
We want to be able to relate, and we know deep down none of us are perfect, right?
Right.
None of us are perfect. All of us could spill the coffee. A couple things run through my mind. One is AI perpetuates this perfect aura, right?
Yeah, illusion,
Okay,
right.
which is also being, framed as work slop, right? So there's something going on of this is the person who I am, or maybe this is the person I want to be, or I think other people perceive I should be. But the other thing that goes through my mind is, this study about Kate and Kevin, right? Kate and Kevin both make the same complaint to the hotline. Kevin gets listened to, Kate gets ignored.
Right.
Right. So we have all kinds of biases, self-perceptions,
Mm-hmm.
issues going on when people come to us and tell us things that are uncomfortable or we don't want to hear, right? Or we don't want to, be seen with. But the more we can, in an artificial intelligence world, use actual intelligence and be
Mm-hmm.
more human, the better.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, people are looking at how, their staffs might be reduced and other things, but ultimately ethics and compliance is about being human.
Right. So what gives you hope? I love that. Was Kate just kind of a troublemaker or maybe an underperformer or what? I'm just kidding.
They knew
Where
nothing about her. They knew
Yeah,
nothing about
I'm
her.
just totally kidding. But what gives
But
you
your
hope on
point
where
is women are perceived that way when
exactly?
they raise a concern because it is against the gender norms.
Yes,
You get
exactly.
it?
That's the base of it.
Yes.
What gives you hope on where our profession is heading? Because it to me seems like a really exciting time as I look out over the next 5 or 10 years in our space. I think it's going to look way different than the last 10 years. That's just my perception. But like, what gets you excited? What gives you hope about where our profession is heading right now?
Yeah, so I think we're getting smarter. I think we're getting better. I think we have absolutely moved from being only roles based to being values based. I think that there absolutely are leaders who understand the value of having a values driven company and the role that ethics and compliance plays in that. I think that in some ways, the use of artificial intelligence will elevate our jobs, right?
Agree.
Because it's about our judgment
Mhm.
and not just, oh my God, did somebody not submit a receipt to their expense report?
Right.
So
The value's not there. It's in the judgment. It's in the human side, to your point.
absolutely, absolutely. And it's in the connection, right? I mean, we absolutely know that employee engagement is key to innovation and productivity.
Right.
And if you don't work for an organization that you think is fair, you're not engaged.
Why? How could you be? It fights directly against your own hypocrisy, radar, your own self-preservation
You're
radar, all
just there
those
for the
things.
paycheck.
Totally.
You're just using it as a perch. So as more things get automated, I think our role becomes more important.
I agree, man. I love it. Well, Ellen, this was really awesome. Love having conversations with you. I'm so glad we finally did an episode together.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll see you soon. Thank you so much for
See
joining.
you at Compliance Week.
See you at Compliance Week for the best dinner of the whole week. I can't wait.
All right.
See you
Bye.
next time.